never give up. I never give up. I never give up.
Hi guys, welcome back to my Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stephan Neff. Another fantastic day for an interview. And our guest today, Guy Morris. I struggled to think about one interview I want to do with him, because when I looked him up and then stalked him a little bit, resume kind of wise, there were so many things I wanted to talk about, because he is a man who literally lived the American dream, if you wanted to say it like that, the rags to riches. He is also a man who has reinvented himself multiple times in different careers. He is a man who has got the foresight of thinking about our future in amazing ways. So we could talk about anything, and I give you already a little hint. He might be coming back, because there are other things I want to tease out about him. But today I want to focus on his absolute amazing and challenging change from a young boy living up in not so nice circumstances towards a man who's leaving a destiny. Yet there have been a lot of dark times, and I want to know, how the hell do you deal with these times? So, Guy, thank you so much for coming onto my show.
Stephen, such an honor to be with you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. We all have childhoods that maybe are not as ideal. Very few people grow up literally behind a white picket fence, and there is a white picket fence and happiness behind it. Bullshit. Most of our families, our parents, they don't get up in the morning to try to think, well, how can I fuck up my children? But they do their best under the circumstances, whatever is happening, but it often leaves scars on us. That was the case in my life. Was that similar in your life?
Absolutely. And I think it took me most of my life to realize that you can't necessarily, ignoring the scars doesn't make them go away. Ignoring the scars doesn't mean that you've healed from them or that you're healthy now. Somebody said the only way through is to go through. And I think there's a truth to that. I wasn't diagnosed until my late 50s that I had complex post-traumatic stress. Now, my entire life, I knew that I had quote unquote issues. I struggled with addiction. I struggled with chronic depression. I had hyperanxiety. I had crippling social anxieties. Brilliant at work, an absolute wallflower in a social situation because I never felt like I could fit in anywhere, like I belonged anywhere, that I could be accepted anywhere. I always felt like I was hiding some part of myself, that if people only knew the real me, I wouldn't be getting the promotions and the raises. So yeah, it's funny how a few short years at the beginning of our life can have profound implications on us for the remainder of our life. And until we make that choice, and it's not a point in time, it's a lifestyle choice. Until we make that lifestyle choice that we do not want to have our past to define our future. And that's not just a single decision. It's not just, oh, I'm going to quit drinking now and poof, that happens, or I'm going to change. I'm not going to take my mom's attitude toward life and incorporate that into my philosophies. You know, it's 100 different decisions. It's 1,000 different decisions that can sometimes take the rest of your life to work out how you're going to execute on that decision. But it can make a profound change. The question would be, is it worth that much effort? Why not? And there was a time in my life I thought, you know what, this is too much work. I'll just stay messed up. It's easier. Except it was easy on one level, but it was a lot more. There was a much deeper, higher cost on another level.
Let's be quite clear though, that we call it messed up, maybe with the eyes of hindsight. When we are, however, the first time taking a sip and you change, and suddenly the world is either no longer as painful, or suddenly advantages happen and a new life opens up. That is revolutionary. What was your first experience when with sort of maybe mind-altering behavior or mind-altering substances?
Wow. My first experience being with before I had decided that I wanted to change my life, I started taking mind-altering substances and drinking a lot when I was 11. I try to tell people that my journey began as a homeless runaway at age 13 on the streets of LA, and I worked alongside migrant workers so I could survive. I tried to pretend for many years that anything before that was just a past life. It was an apparition. And in fact, I had pretty broad amnesia over a good part of my childhood. When I finally did get an opportunity to go to college, which was a miracle in and of itself, I got a copy of my transcripts and realized that before I had dropped out of school in the 10th grade, I had already been to 16 different schools. Wow. And I couldn't remember 2/3 of them. Wow. They just were complete. I had no memory of them whatsoever. And so when we heal, we have to realize that sometimes our body, it's going to come at its own pace. I wanted to just snap my fingers and instantly have it all behind
me. Just like that.
It doesn't quite work out that way. It takes a little bit more patience and persistence and intention than that.
I strongly believe that trauma comes in layers, and equally your healing will happen in layers. You sort of scrape one bit of the onion away and you think, oh, there's a bit of pus there. There's a bit of yucky stuff there. So you deal with that. And then, okay, see, now the onion is good. Yeah, next layer. And you think, oh, shit. So
you sometimes have to heal and kind of, recuperate a little bit in between those layers. You can't even do them all at once. You have to absorb those lessons and that healing before you're ready for the next one.
Sure. But initially,
that's okay that we go through that process, because I don't think we could go from 0 to 60 in two steps and not lose something in the process. It's as much about the process itself as the destination in that case.
Problem, of course, is we don't know the destination when we're in the middle of the mess. But initially you knew that the alcohol was there. What did the alcohol give you?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
There's a reason that you were drinking. Was the pain going away? Were you changing into an alter ego who was now more outgoing, able to talk to the girls or the boys or whatever,
All of the above. I came from an extremely violent, abusive, vulgar, dysfunctional childhood. I don't like to go into the details because it get triggering, but as I was told by one psychologist that I was probably at, like 1/10 of 1% of people experience that kind of baloney. And as I said, I had shut down. By the time I was 12, I was an addict. By the time I was 13, I was homeless. I was absolutely trying to do anything to escape the reality I was living because I felt that there was a hopelessness in everything that was being laid out before me. I didn't see any path out of the extreme poverty. I didn't see any path. The only path I could see out of the violent and the home situation was to leave. And even if that meant, as a 13-year-old, sleeping under freeway bridges, sleeping in the backs of cars that weren't locked, sleeping in, sometimes if it was raining, in garbage cans to stay out of the rain. That to me was a better option on many levels, as traumatic as that was. than being at home and never feeling safe, even through the middle of the night. And so I wanted to, there was a movie that came out about 10 years ago, maybe more. It was called A Knight's Tale. It had Heath Ledger in it. And there was a line in the movie, and the basic plot of the movie is a pauper kid who has no hope, no education, is a serf to a knight, and the knight's an old knight, and he dies. And so in order to eat, he has to pretend to be a knight in order for them to go to tournaments so that they can get money to eat. And when he's caught, he basically says, I just wanted to change my stars. I didn't want to believe, and for me, I didn't want to believe that I was doomed to this dysfunctional, violent, alcoholic, drug addicted, promiscuous lifestyle that other people were able to change. Why not me? And I didn't know how. I didn't know what that would look like. I had no particular role models per se, because I'd grown up without any parents. It was more of an internal, just deep desire that I didn't want my past to define my future for me. If I was going to fail, and there was a real good chance that I would, I wanted it to be on my terms. I didn't want it to be something that was dictated to me that this is who you're going to be.
Love it. How old were you then when this desire started appearing?
Around 12, 13 years old.
Right. Okay.
And then I went home. I was gone for about 6 months. I went home for about a year to get my GED, which is a sort of a high school equivalent. But I was still functionally illiterate. And I got the GED because of all my work credits. I got school credits for basically working. And so while I was, all that time that I was working, didn't realize I was earning school credits. So they let me go. They let me graduate with a GED, but I still had really no educational skills whatsoever. And so when I had an opportunity when I was accepted into college by an absolute miracle, the first couple of years was me teaching myself how to read and teaching myself how to show up and how to get study habits. And by the time I graduated, but I wasn't sleeping. I was so obsessed that this was my one chance. This was the chance for me to basically make a big difference in my life. And so I would sleep maybe 3-4 hours a night, and I was working. I had to support my own needs. I was married. I had a toddler, so I had to be a father, had to be a provider, and then I had to go to school and take a full credit. And I had to do well because this was my only chance that I was ever going to get in life to make something of myself. Now, I ultimately graduated with multiple degrees at the top of the dean's list. I got a full scholarship to go to the school I was at, which was Arizona. I got accepted into Harvard, but I couldn't afford the tuition, so I didn't go there. All of that was because I had created a macroeconomic model that outperformed the U.S. Federal Reserve and pretty much every other school in the nation.
The past does not equal the future, does it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that certainly got a lot of people's attention.
Shit, yeah. So hang on. I would say 95% of the people listening, including myself, have no freaking clue what a macroeconomic model is. So maybe go a bit there into depth.
Yeah, everyone hears about the computer model that predicts climate change, or the computer model that predicts where the market's going, or the computer model that predicts something. And when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's essentially computer models using certain mathematical and probability algorithms and techniques to take existing data and then project where the next data point is going to fall. And we do that with economics, how to predict what the GNP, or the gross national product, is going to be this next coming quarter and the quarter after that. And what's the interest rate going to be, and how's that going to affect unemployment? And trillions of dollars are based on guessing these models correctly. Because if I'm off and I make a business decision based on bad data, somebody's going to make more money than me. And we know that greed drives a lot of bad behavior. And so I had actually developed the model. I was the first one to prove that there was a mathematical link, that there was a direct link between the productivity of our technology sales and the productivity of what was happening in the economy. So for the 80s and 90s, economists talked about the productivity of technology. Those were all based on the model that I had created back in the early 80s.
Wow. How did you get to that? I mean, you don't just wake up and think, hey, I should do a macroeconomic model.
It was part of it was what I had to do to graduate. Now, I wanted to go to grad school, and so I made a wager with the dean of the college that and he basically graded on a curve. So the closer you were to the actual numbers, the better your grade. The further away from the actual numbers, the worse your grade. And so he was going to grade the whole class on a curve. I said, well, if I can beat the whole class, I said, will you consider me for scholarship? Because at that point I was out of money. I wanted to go to grad school. I had no way to pay home. And he kind of hemmed and hawed and said he might consider it. And that was, again, that sense of, I have to invest in my own future. No one's going to just give me the money. I have to prove myself. I have to do something of value for them.
Yeah.
And so I spent months, literally months, going to the data center. This is back when you didn't have a personal computer. If you wanted to get to the computer, you had to go to a big data center, typically a basement room with no windows, and you got this terminal.
Yep.
And you either had to wait in line to get the terminal, or you were at the terminal. And so I would go at midnight because all the other kids were going home at that point. And I would work from midnight to my first class at 8 o'clock in the morning, almost every night for months, determined that I was going to prove this new theory that I had developed. And I did. But at the same time, I got really ill. Weeks before I was supposed to graduate, I got valley fever. I was actually in bed for 4 months. And I had to get an incomplete on some of my courses so I could finish them in the summer. Just to graduate. But he saw that I was sick and it still worked out. I probably needed to sleep at that point anyway, needed to rest. But yeah, that got me into grad school.
Wow. But again, you were a go-getter. And I think there are children who have gone through hard childhoods, and they develop certain features, traits.
Self-reliance.
Exactly. The self-reliance.
There's a subconscious, intuitive belief that no one's going to do it for me.
Absolutely.
No one's going to just come along and make it easy. To say, I'll do it for you. No one's going to give you that chance. If you don't really put in that extra layer of effort, it's just not going to happen. And I could see that there were so many other people in business and in the schools whose daddies were wealthy and bought them a really nice car, and they were just slacking off because they took for granted that the money would always be there. And for me, I could never, ever take that for granted. And so that sense of having to be the thought leader, the innovator, followed me throughout my career. So I was on the leading edge of a number of technologies in the enterprise, from desktop computing to computer modeling to using the internet for international communications. I had teams in 5 continents and I had to communicate with them. Early stage of artificial intelligence, cloud services, large projects, complex projects with new technologies. I developed a track record of going in and looking at how to take leading edge technology and figure out how to use that in order to make a real difference in how the business operated.
Wow. Wow. And of course, you are defining yourself with your achievements. I often say that I was a workaholic far before I became an alcoholic. But with you, you started damn early. I think we can't give you that credit. But you certainly do. Would you call yourself a workaholic?
That could apply. Absolutely. Even today, when I'm retired, I'll get up in the morning. I get a piece of toast, a half a banana, my cup of coffee. I boot up, and that's I'm at my desk until my bedtime is typically 2 o'clock in the morning. But for me, it comes from a couple of different things. One is I felt like my life, I was redeemed from a really horrible life. If I hadn't gone to college, I would have had no money, no education, no training, and then to still have to deal with all the PTSD in terms of addiction and all the psychological damage that was done from that. It would have. I had a chance to change my stars, and not many people get to. And so I've always felt an obligation that God didn't do that so I could just slack off and go watch TV or go to a movie or get an extra DVD or buy that extra movie channel or that. And so there's this somewhat internal sense of I'm this is for a purpose. I need to discover and be faithful to that purpose. And then there's a certain point in time when the mind gets stimulated to a certain level where, at least for me, it became a craving. I always wanted to learn more. I always wanted to do that extra thing.
Love
And
it.
it wasn't that I was doing the same thing. I was always wanting to do something new. I was always wanting to say, oh, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I could explore that? Or wouldn't it be cool if let me go learn more about this other thing, or let me go travel so I can get to know that other culture. I got a Coast Guard charter captain license because I was living on a big sailboat, and if I was going to do that, I might as well do it well.
Excellent. You and me, we need to look in our ancestry. We so are alike. It's a day where I don't learn something new is a sad day for me.
Very sad.
I love it. I love your spark of life.
And that
But
drive for discovery actually feeds my books.
Nice.
And it keeps me stimulated, and it keeps me excited to get, boredom to me is the addict's Achilles heel.
Oh, nice one. Let me go back though to that before we dive into your new life. We were talking 80s here, and 80s were renowned for being very wet. It was a wet decade as far as business was concerned. Here you were becoming more and more successful. Inevitably, there was pressure to also be seen in the crowd, and drink was part and parcel of that. So how did your attitude towards alcohol, your relationship with alcohol and drugs, how did that change?
I was a single parent. And at that point, by the time the 80s had run around, my first marriage had fallen apart. I had lost custody of my daughter, but gained custody of my son because he was the troublemaker. My ex-wife didn't want to deal with that. And I was drinking a lot. I was very promiscuous. I was doing drugs. I was doing extremely well at work. I was falling apart at home. And I think there was an incident where I had to break up with a woman because I realized that she was really not healthy for my son. And all of a sudden I realized I saw myself, I saw my mother in my actions. I realized that as much as I hated my own childhood, I was becoming I was becoming that which I hated. I
Wow.
was self-absorbed. I was never home because I was always either out working or out drinking. And that realization that I was gonna do to him what was, and I wasn't violent. I mean, it didn't have, and I justified that I was okay because it wasn't as bad.
Mm.
But I had to come to face the truth that it doesn't matter if it's as bad, it's still bad.
Mm.
I was still leaving him with a legacy that he deserved better.
Mm.
I didn't want to continue to slide into that sense of alcoholic delusion that somehow it wasn't as bad as it was. And so I realized the first thing I had to do, my first step,
Mm.
was
Wow.
to deal with the alcohol. And so I was going to some therapy at the time, but because I had PTSD and nobody really understood PTSD back then, the therapist was really kind of misdirecting a lot of different things, and I don't think it was really helping that much. So I actually joined a 12-step program and
Mm.
found at least some courage among others who were struggling with this same issue to get sober.
Mm.
But I still, getting sober from alcohol didn't totally get me off of all the drugs. It didn't get me from being promiscuous. It had to be a repetitive, iterative, okay, now I've got to deal with this problem. And the hardest part of recovery, but it's the most important part for me, was the willingness to be able to examine myself with a rigorous self-honesty and not make excuses.
Mm.
And if I couldn't see myself as the man that I was never going to have a chance to change myself into the man I wanted it to be.
Mm.
And so it was my son, wanting to be, realizing that I loved him and I didn't want to leave him give him what I had gotten
Mm.
in terms of a childhood. And so I was going to do whatever it took to change. And even if it took a decade, that would be a decade. It would be better than not doing it at all.
Beautiful. Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So you ditched the alcohol, and that for sure was not a straightforward trajectory. No more alcohol. No, I'm just fine now. Yeah, about that.
I wanted to believe that, yes.
Okay, but I love to say,
If I could moderate the behavior, I could ignore the reason for the behavior. At least.
Oh. Yeah, that doesn't work, does it? Because we're addicts. It's just, you stop drinking, then you eat sugar until the cows come home, and then if you stop the sugar, then you're smoking like a chimney. So
yeah. So I was slowly I smoked. I lived on a boat, so it was easy for me to smoke cigars, a lot of cigars, because if I was sailing, the smell would always go behind us. But yeah, it took me several years before I started realizing, okay, well, this is unhealthy too, and okay, well, this is unhealthy too, and the acceptance of myself as not just an alcoholic but as an addict slowly allowed me to address the other dysfunctional behaviors and addictions, including dating women that weren't appropriate, and to try and get to those. Now, I wasn't able to fully get to some of the issues because they were buried in amnesia that I'd had from my childhood, and I couldn't really necessarily deal with the pain of a situation I couldn't even really remember, except in really weird, foggy, fragmented flashbacks. It wasn't until my 50s when my brother passed away, but a few months before he passed away, he was a Navy vet, and he had been in counseling as a Navy vet for PTSD for a number of years, until he finally called me up and he said, you know what, I've been, and I knew he'd been working on the PTSD. And he said, PTSD didn't come from the war, it came from our childhood. Have you ever dealt with that?
Wow.
I said, no, I never even thought about it. I said, it wasn't until I think he really kind of got me along the path to investigate that all the pieces fell into place. And then I could start actually finally dealing with the deeper wounds that were the roots of all those other things.
Beautiful.
And that was that. But had I not dealt with all those other things first, had I not also been relatively successful at that point at getting clean and sober, and where I was still dealing with a lot of the emotional stuff, but at least I was moderating some of the behaviors that weren't making it worse. If I hadn't done that, it would have been even harder. But so I don't regret it, but I do wish I had been able to. We all wish that we could have been able to get healed, become whole before we had done all the damage. But I had to deal with the damage and accept accountability. But it took a while, but I got there, and I'm still working on it. But I feel like I've got it. I've actually been dealing with the real issues the last several years, and that's really brought in a tremendous amount of peace. Where I don't really feel anymore that this addictive monster is just sitting on my shoulder waiting for me to mess up all the time.
Yeah. But then again, here you are. If you have already started to describe a little bit your daily habits that you put in place, which means you're getting up in the morning, you're having food, you've developed a purpose. There are already 4 or 5 things that speak out, which when we're in the midst of addiction, when we're thinking about the bad old times, there was none of that there. So here you are, you have started to put, let's rephrase that. Every decision we make is either pulling us closer to a lapse or a relapse, or is pushing us away from it. And if you're not thinking about addiction, if you just think about mental well-being versus mental illness, it's the same thing. There are certain habits that will more or less assure you to head away or head towards a really beautiful life, or you can create a really bad life just by the decisions that you make. You have developed the insight that you have the privilege of choice. You made that happen, and that is so important. When did you start realizing that you have to make changes? When did you actually ditch the alcohol in relation to your life, and in which kind of decade of your life?
I was probably in my early 30s.
Nice.
Before I finally started accepting the fact that I had become an alcoholic. I was probably even willing to admit it until then.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until actually I dealt with the alcohol that I started to actually start understanding the other issues that were going along with that and feeding that. And I had, again, no real idea how to move past these things at that point, just a deep desire that I wanted to.
But so that was the alcohol, and then, but it took you 20 years to then realize the impact that your childhood really had, and it just shows the healing that comes in the layers. You can't get it all done in 1 year, 1 month.
20 years. Well, it took also 20 years for me to also realize that it was deeper. That okay, now that I've got it, had no job skills, and I had no jobs, and I was hungry, and I was cold, and my clothes were ragged. You're just hoping for a better job. And when you get, then when I go to college and I realize I can not only just have a better job, I can have a better career. And when you start actually earning that and achieving some things there, then you're realizing that, wait a minute, why am I still depressed? Why am I still hyper anxious? Why am I still drinking? Why? You start to realize, well, wait a minute, I had those things I thought I needed. That wasn't enough. What now? What is it? And it took a little bit of time for me to get over the delusion that my drugs and alcohol and other issues were just a factor of circumstances, right? That there was actually something deeper there that I needed to address. And even then, I didn't really want to. Those were very, very painful experiences. I wanted to do anything I could to just deal with these surface stuff and then stay in my head without having to really search my heart and go through that pain and understanding that pain again. I didn't want to do that, even though that was the thing that I needed to do to get past the pain. I had to go through it to get past it. And just getting to that acceptance without saying, well, I can just do this one thing over here, or I can just do this other thing over there, or I just need some new friends, or maybe I should go to church, or, this or that, and did tons of things to cover up the pain. And when the pain persisted, I had to take it. I had to find another way of saying, well, there's something else that obviously that I'm not addressing. What's going to deal with this? And at one point, just saying, okay, that's my karma. My karma is to be one of those guys who lives in pain. I'm okay. I certainly have a job. I'm not starving anymore. I'm not as bad as I used to be. So therefore, I should just take take what I got and be happy with it. But there's also a part of you that just doesn't want to do that. This just says, no, I really want to get rid of this pain. And but not medicated, not self-medicated away, not trying to ignore it away, not try and be overindulgent to distract myself so I'm not thinking about it. I want to actually deal with it at its roots. And that took time to get to the point where I was both ready and had some idea of how to make that step forward, because it wasn't always intuitive.
Were there people in your life that ended up guiding you? How did you meet those people?
Well, I had one girlfriend at the time who basically told me that if I didn't go to, I was cheating on her, and if I didn't go take care of the problem, that we were done. And so that was kind of a motivation, and thinking I would just go to this, 12-step group for a little while, and that would be, for sexaholics, and that would just kind of take care of that, and that would be over. But then going through that made me realize that I really had some deeper issues there that I wasn't really happy with myself and proud of myself about. And so I had to really go through some changes. My second wife has been my angel. I had gone through several of these 12-step programs, and I was getting clean and sober, and I was still pretty active, but I still had hyper insecurities. And I remember we started dating, and about 2 or 3 weeks into this, I kept thinking, okay, this one could get serious. I said, she's a really, really nice girl. I says, I don't want to be the guy that lies to her and doesn't tell her about his past so I told her everything. I basically just did the whole big, you're really nice, and expecting her to say, well, I can't see you anymore. You're not the kind, I think, we need to take a step back. I was ready for the take a step back conversation. And she was like, and her whole attitude was, thanks for telling me, but, that's not going to scare me away. And I was just like, okay, now that's scaring me.
Good on you. How old were you then?
I was probably in my late 30s by then.
Nice.
So this had been several years of trying to get my life in a better place and get my son in a better place but I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to continue to hurt people out of just being selfish for what I wanted and needed. And I felt that I couldn't move forward without being honest with her about the struggles that I continued to have. I said, I'm through these things, but I said, I still have all these things that I'm trying to deal with, and I don't know how to deal with. And you're a really nice girl. You should go find a really nice guy, And she took that as a challenge. She said, challenge accepted. Now, I didn't realize this at the time, but she's one of those type of people who rescue cats and animals and dogs. And so I was just her ultimate rescue.
I was about to say, we're your project.
Yeah.
Oh, shit. But then again, I mean, look how the project turned out. There's something to be said about her skill levels.
Well, and I would put it differently. There's something to be said about trying to deal with your own issues in a place where you feel safe,
Beautifully said.
in a place where you
Beautifully
know
said.
that somebody knows you for who you really are. They love you anyway. Now that, well, you can say that's good judgment or bad judgment, but they love you anyway. And they're willing to be, they're not willing to tolerate your bad behavior, but they're willing to be patient while you work on it.
Beautiful.
That is an amazingly powerful gift to have. Regardless. And so she gave me that sense of feeling safe in that relationship. And I needed that. I needed that lack of judgment. I needed that ability to say, okay, well, I know you can do it. Just keep working on it, and without feeling condemned all the time when I failed. And this is a woman who saw me react at one point, and I started a business. It was a little bit, there was reasons why I shouldn't have, and I knew it in my head, but I tried to ignore them. We lost a lot of money. And rather than holding it over me, she was able to walk past it, say, well, now we know. Now you've learned. And that's a pretty special gift. So I've been fortunate.
And that's, for crying out loud. I mean, what to say about that? I think that shows the fact that she has done a lot of work on herself, because without actually putting the oxygen on you first in an aircraft accident, you can't look after others. So that's the first thing I would observe there. Having said that, it is so important what you say there, because here we are trying to do work, deal with the past, while meanwhile the present is there, and there are continuously challenging changes happening. I mean, the last 3 years were a bitch for absolutely everyone, from COVID to workplace changes to climate change to disasters, you name it. Everyone I know has been affected one way or the other, typically in a negative way. So here we are trying our best to deal with ourselves, when just the gods up there say, come on here, have another spoon of shit on your plate and enjoy. So, and I know this is one of your passions, because you are looking into the implications of a constantly changing world on us. So what the hell of a chance do we have as addicts to keep our acts together when continuously shit rains down on us?
When we get to that point as addicts, that we realize that our addiction is not strengthened or weakened by our circumstances, it's strengthened and weakened by our inner resolve. When we can separate our sobriety from our circumstances, right? Because that's really kind of a weakness, is to use circumstances as an excuse for losing our sobriety. When we get past that, so it shouldn't really matter if the circumstances is trouble with somebody at work, or trouble in a marriage, or trouble with our health, or anxiety about the world. If we can root our sobriety around self-love and self-respect. I'm no longer, there was a time when I was trying to stop drinking and modify my behavior so I didn't hurt other people. Now I'm at the, now then it becomes a point where I'm not going to do it because I don't want to hurt myself. And you realize the benefits of that sobriety, the blessings of that sobriety. And so it's harder to get pulled back into it. Now we are in, and I would argue that we're in probably the most unusual, unprecedented time of any time in history, on a global level, on a dynamic level, everywhere from power, international travel, the fact that I could be talking to you through this a wired thing, and then I can see your face and we can interact in real time, unprecedented levels of human engagement, computing power, nanotechnologies, material sciences, medicine, pharmaceuticals, space exploration, and now this thing called artificial intelligence, which within a very few short years is poised to basically be a super intelligence in things that we really don't know how to control. Add climate, add politics, and world viruses, water shortages, food shortages. We've got we have to look at the world without the need for control. And one of the things that feeds our addiction is this desire, this belief that we have to be in control. But, just, the whole 12-step prayer, I need to, well, I'm going to have a mental block on it, but basically,
grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot,
that I can't change, the wisdom, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly.
There's a plethora of things that we can't change right now.
True.
And so part of that same process of getting through our addictions with our life on a more personal level, we should be expanding that mentality to the world around us and say, well, I can't change that, but yet it's still about my individual serenity. It's still about my individual sense of groundedness and wholeness and peacefulness. And we're dealing with the same issues. And so if I were to, we've heard climate change models that are predicting some fairly serious ramifications on the world. I recently read how an AI went through and reran many of those models and came up with more pessimistic outcomes than the human developers were, because as humans, we kind of were saying, well, it's not going to get that bad. We don't want to sell the worst case scenario because everyone calls us alarmists. But if we look at issues of economics, money, supply chain, national securities, China's getting more aggressive, Russia's getting more self-destructive, and there you have Putin has a scorched earth strategy. He's willing to take the world down with him if he can't get what he wants. We see a lot of negative trajectories. And if I were to run those just purely at a mathematical level, there's certainly a lot of reasons to feel alarmed. And the reasons to feel alarmed are not that we couldn't solve that if we wanted to. I constantly argue that as a global community, we have all of the technologies, all of the financial resources, all of the human resources to solve every problem facing mankind, from water, food, education, housing, peace. But we don't. And the reason we don't has solely to do with what's wrong in our spirit and our inability to basically find that, get beyond our tribalism, get beyond our ideologies, get beyond our religious boundaries, to basically see ourselves as connected. And that if one part of us is hurting over here, even though it's going to hurt everybody. And the only people who believe that that's not true are the people who are so wealthy that they can insulate themselves.
True. Very true.
And so the problem is whether we can't fix it. The question that I usually raise is whether we will fix it in time. Or whether we have a tendency of waiting until it's a crisis, and then we react in this very reactive way, oftentimes too little too late. So, but I can't let that bother me either, because the reality is we all have an expiration date. Every single one. And it's not a question of when our expiration date will come up or how it will come up. The question that we were trying to resolve as former addicts is how do I live my best life now? And best life doesn't mean self-indulgent life. Best life means most productive, most loving, most human life, most filled with the most humanity, filled with the most compassion. And those human connections are what make our lives important. How do I live my best life now while before my expiration date comes due, regardless of which of these crises might become part of my expiration date story? And that's almost irrelevant. And one of the things that I deal with in my books with artificial intelligence is I basically use artificial intelligence to say, what if artificial intelligence could decode end-time prophecy? How would that change us in our behavior? And how would that basically infect us in terms of how we saw the world and what's going on? And I try to make the argument that it would be really no different than if a doctor were to say, hey, you've got something that's incurable, you've got maybe 10 years. Make sure it's worthwhile. Make sure you're spending those 10 years wisely so that at the end of it, you're leaving the right choices. And that's really what I think this is about. And we have to do, as addicts, we are forced to basically do that in a more intentional way than people who don't have that behavioral dysfunction that forces them into that choice pattern, right?
At the same token, though, please, Guy, we have to say that this is actually a gift that we were given. We were forced to take good, long, hard looks at ourselves, which led to us living intentional lives. We are far more likely to stop for a moment and think, okay, hang on here. This is my old behavior coming out again. What's going on? We see it as messages to from our body and from our soul to say, hey, look, I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Let's do something about that. Not reach to the bottle or go whatever addiction you were previously using as a rescue to escape your reality. No, we are now.
So we're better prepared.
Exactly. So I think that is actually an advantage. And we have got the ability to model that. And that model comes with doing the right things at the right time, most of the times, even if we do the wrong thing, if we have a lapse.
Giving ourselves when we make a mistake.
Absolutely. And that is, again, a way of modeling that to say, okay, fine, I just slip back now. What has happened? And be open about it to your family, to your children who will see, okay, it's okay to make a mistake, but there is integrity there to own up to it and to move forward. And because the past does not equal the future. And we have got at every single moment, we have got the privilege of choice. We can make decision and take action towards a life where we are proud to be the person, where we think, wow, did I do that? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is beautiful. That is, which gives me the thing that gives me hope. There is a lot of shit happening, very true, in my immediate environment, in the global environment. That's absolutely true. And I certainly fell in a pitfall over the last 2 months to have a bit of a pity party. Oh, poor me, poor me, poor me, another one. That kind of attitude. Right. And it's destructive. And it's okay to, from now and then, have a pity party, but I'm pleased
and
that
it doesn't have a productive end. It doesn't really result in solving the issue. It doesn't really result in helping us feel better about ourselves or our situation.
Not at all. Yeah, exactly.
It's sort of kind of a pointless loop. But you're right, and it's okay that we fall back into that. We have to go through these cycles, and even that's okay to kind of get into that cycle for a little while. As long as at some point in time we say, okay, this isn't helping. If I can't change, if I can't change that, can I accept that? And then what can I change? And then find the courage for that. And I think it's the same process we had to go through in dealing with addictions is sort of the same process we have to go through in dealing with the scary parts of the world right now.
I like that. I liked it a lot. We've got our work cut out. No two ways around that. Yeah. But then again, that's true. But again, here we are coming more closely together. Today, I meet you. We are finding out, wow, we have got the same passions. So here is a potential alliance to be made. And can you imagine if we find others who are equal-minded, and we say, well, actually, let's put a bit of our efforts together and say which of the topics shall we address? And that is the powerful way forward. The opposite to addiction is connection. And here we are connecting, and we're opening up. And by being open about that, we are actually showing the strength that is inherent in each of us. And if we just harness that strength and put a direction, a moral direction there into where we want to go, I mean, wow, what can we achieve?
Even in the worst of circumstances, history and experience can show us that we can still have an impact on somebody's life.
True. Very nicely said. Yeah.
And I think that's where, again, where our focus needs to be, which is, what are the things I can change, and how do I find the courage to do that? And that's important, because there are going to be things that we're not going to be able to control. I have no control over some of the over the war in Ukraine. I have no control over the threats around Taiwan. I have no control over the threats in my own government and my own political systems. But I do have control over a lot of other things. I have control over how I respond to those things. I have control over the friendships. I have control over what the things I can do to make a little bit of a difference in somebody's life. Maybe not everybody's, but somebody. I don't have to affect the whole world. I just need to make sure that I'm affecting the life right in front of me.
Nice.
And so, yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I write the books is to try and put all of these other larger issues in perspective to those individual choices.
Beautiful. Guy, I certainly want to learn more about your books as a little bit of homework I'm looking forward to do.
I'll tell you one story. Tell you two things. Every single book is deeply rooted on real events. Some of them happen directly to me, but real truths, real events, real technologies, politics, history, etc. I'll tell you one story that I like to tell people because it's a fun story. The books that deal with artificial intelligence and espionage and all this kind of stuff, it started when I came across an Associated Press article, just a little short 2-paragraph article, that basically said that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore laboratories at Sandia, which is a well-known NSA spy lab. They do the Stuxnet virus. They do signal cryptology. I spent months. I was floored by that little blurb, and didn't say it was lost or stolen or corrupted. It said it was escaped. And so I spent months trying to figure out exactly how a spy program could escape the NSA spy labs. And then, because that implied it had some kind of intent, that implied some level of intelligence, implied the ability for it to move itself, and then erase the log trails so that it's gone, the NSA doesn't know how to find it. And so then I spent months more saying, well, what kind of program did the NSA need to have stealth technologies for, right? What did they want this stealth program to do? About the time I finished doing that, we produced a webisode series that won all kinds of awards. It got optioned by one of the studios. 2 weeks before the studio was going to sign the option, 2 FBI agents showed up at my door. So, they were rather perturbed that I had figured out something they thought for sure was top secret. My wife, I thought it was. I was giggling. I thought this was perfect. I nailed it. I must have nailed it. My wife was not so happy. She pulled me aside. She's saying, "Why are there 2 FBI agents in my dining room? What did you do, buddy?"
Priceless. Okay. Well, but that's the reality. These are the things that we are facing in 2023. Things do escape out of labs, some in China, some in the United States. So it's just a question of when and what is next. And I like the way you're thinking. But also I'm intrigued about the way that you're going about creating those stories, wrapping the storytelling wrapping the events with storytelling into something that hopefully your readers read and then say, and ponder.
That's my intent, is I could write just a thriller that's just a generic thriller, and there's a lot of those out there. but I infuse my fiction with a real healthy amount of fact because I want to blend that line between fiction and reality, and have that sense of plausibility. This really could happen. Be part of that storytelling technique. So my characters and my plots are fictional, but everything underneath that is factual, which helps pull a lot of these things together and gives it that sense of, yes, that could happen. It could happen soon. And getting people to think, well, what do I think about that? What are my beliefs about that? Or how would I react to that? And I think that makes for a really compelling narrative. And I think Tolstoy did this when he was talking about the transition between imperialism to communism. Mark Twain did it when he talked about racism in the South and that culture. Michael Crichton did it when he talked about DNA splicing and cloning in Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Dan Brown did it when he talked about theories around Mary Magdalene and Christ. And when you can blend the fact and the fiction really closely together in a clever way, I think it just makes it the story a lot more fun.
Oh, hell yes. Hell yes. I love it. What was your most recent book, and where can we find your books and more information about you?
Well, the easy question first, which is that you can go to guymorrisbooks.com and you'll find all the books, all 3 books. I'm working on the 4th one now. You'll get buy links to where you can find the book. You'll get highlights and links to all the major reviews and awards. You'll see my social media and my other podcasts and media kit. There's fact versus fiction pages because I try to be very transparent about saying what's fact. Okay, now this part I just made up.
Nice.
So that there's some transparency there. In some cases, I'll provide a link to an article if it's something that others, like when I talk about a program being able to rewrite its own code, rather than trying to just tell people that's a fact, I'll link to some of the articles and research. And there's some videos as well as the location shots of the locations where these things actually took place. So that's the best place to go. My latest book, Last Ark, is a continuation of my espionage, artificial intelligence espionage series. It's the second in the series, and it deals with sort of the supposed prophetic issue of a third temple. And it's based on there's a number of true stories in it about artificial intelligence and cyber and AI data poisoning and real issues with the based on a Rand Corporation report to the DoD. But the title of the Last Ark came from 2 stories that are true. Most people, I don't know if you know about this, but a lot of people know that there was an Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia. It originally left Jerusalem 2,600 years ago with Solomon's son Menelek and 500 priests. They built a temple on Elephant Island and on the Nile River in Egypt, where it was in temple worship for several hundred years until the 2nd century, when the Romans came and they chased them away. They went in synagogues in Ethiopia, and then the Templars came and moved it into churches. All of that is well documented. There's scrolls and papyri and archaeology and ruins and history books that cover all of that. What most people don't know is that in January 21, an Ethiopian militia group stormed the city of Axum, stormed this particular church. 750 men, women, and children were massacred. This ark was then stolen and sold on the black market. So the Last Ark deals with who had the political power, the money, and the will to own this ancient Jewish relic and why. That combines with a second ark. Now, in the 1960s, outside of the Qumran by the Dead Sea, where all of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, archaeologists found a copper scroll about 18 inches high and about 6-8 inches wide. And it took them for years but they didn't find it with the other scrolls, which were in jars. This one was hidden behind a fake mud wall, so it was basically meant not to be discovered. And they discovered it by accident. And it took them years to unravel this very brittle copper and read it. And when they did, they found that it had 64 locations where a pre-Babylonian temple priest had hidden tens of tons, billions and billions of dollars worth of temple treasures. And in the 64th location is a second copper scroll that describes where Jeremiah hid the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. Now, that story of Jeremiah and his scribe Barak hiding the temple treasures and the Ark of the Testimony was included in the second book of Maccabees. So there's an historical foundation for that story. Now, for 50 years, people have been trying to find these locations and failing because they were all looking in the city of Jerusalem. About 6-7 years ago, an American came along and actually decoded all 64 locations underneath the ruins of Qumran itself. He was able to convince not only the Jewish Sanhedrin, which is their priest group that in charge of the temple, but they were able to convince the Israeli Archaeology and Antiquities group to go do a metal scan, do a survey. They found non-ferrous metals under every single location, but they only dug down around 2 feet, even though the scroll said to dig down around 9 to 12 feet, because they wanted to kill the rumors that there was something there. The reason is because this Qumran is part of the Palestinian West Bank. By law, anything that Israel would dig up and find there would go into this tribunal kind of warehouse, and they'd never see it again. That was also about the same time they started talking about a single state solution. So we now have 2 Arks of the Covenant that are basically attainable, either already in possession of somebody or easily attainable with a little bit of excavation. And we know exactly which location has the second copper scroll. That could dramatically change the geopolitics of the Middle East.
Damn.
So those were 2 of the pieces of research that went into the last Ark, which is that last book.
I can't wait to read it, man. I can't wait to read it.
It's fun stuff.
Excellent. So, guys, you listeners, viewers out there, look down there into the description of the YouTube video of the podcast. You see, guys, links down there. I don't know about you, but I know what I'll read next. So that's cool. Guy, you're an amazing man. The question is, what happens now? You're working on your 4th book. Are you reinventing yourself? Or is that for the time being? Have you tasted blood? Do you love to be the author who can research things, who can make others think?
I right now I'm enjoying doing that. I've also started an author group that takes other authors, including myself, to all kinds of different events, festivals, and fairs in the local area where we'll be busy selling books every weekend from the first week of May to the mid-October. And then I'm working with a PR consultant to, because of my expertise in artificial intelligence and cyber espionage and all the technology issues affecting those things, she's working with me to land some television spots by this time next year.
Brilliant.
So I'm trying to constantly reinvent myself and do things I hadn't done. But I really am enjoying the whole author perspective because I do get to do meaningful research into real issues, most of which most people aren't really well aware of. I don't need to write sci-fi for AI in order to find the possible scenarios of, gee, what could go wrong in the immediate next year or 2 kind of future. So I'm kind of just focusing on that. And I do intentionally, I write every book saying I'm hoping I can get people to think about these issues in a new way.
Guy, you're an amazing man. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. You certainly made my day today. And you certainly made me think a lot. So for that, I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you, sir.
And you guys out there, look after yourself and live with passion. Bye.
I never give up. I never give up. I never give up. Turn around.